James Dobrowski and Benjamin Penrose from Sharkmob London. We're very happy to join us today on our podcast. We talked about building games in London, a very expensive city for game dev. We discussed how do they hire and retain employees, and what can you do to make sure that your team produces incredible results.
Greetings and welcome to the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. In each episode, host Kirill Tokarev invites video game industry leaders to talk about the world of game development. No topic is off limits as long as it relates to video game development. New episodes are in the works, so remember to follow us or subscribe and share with someone you know will also enjoy the podcast.
Can you introduce yourself to our audience? We did a little bit of an interview with James already. I don't think we covered Benjamin on the website. So if you can do like a little intro, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Benjamin Penrose, and I'm the art director at Sharkmob London, and have been working in the industry now for just over 10 years. So I started off my career working at Playground Games and joined the team at Sharkmob back in 2020. Or 2020. It's 2020. Yeah. Like ever since the pandemic, all the years blur together, right?
It was, opening day for the studio was the end of September 2020. So we're about 18 months old now. So still quite young. Me and Ben actually started our games careers together when Ben was a concept artist and I was a producer. More years ago than I dare to think now, just as Playground Games was opening up to work on Forza Horizon, the first Forza Horizon game. So me and Ben have worked together for a very, very long time.
I think we partnered with Playground Games a couple of years ago. We were looking for people for Horizon as well as the new Fable that they're working on. But tell me about Sharkmob. So the first question I have, when I learned that there is this new studio coming up, is that you actually have offices in London. So why London? I mean, it seems like the most expensive place to have a studio right now.
It's a good question, and it probably is one of the most expensive places in the UK. Although it's interesting, I think the salary differences or the salary bands you see in London versus the rest of the UK are getting smaller and smaller over time. But yeah, there's a bunch of other costs that make London more expensive than other places. However, on both a local scale within London and I think on a national scale, being on the UK, there's a lot of benefits. On the UK side of things, we obviously have the video games tax relief system, which really actually helps in bringing down dev costs and making us a little bit more competitive with the rest of Europe than you would think, even in London. But the choice to be in London for Sharkmob London specifically was for a few reasons. The biggest being access to talent. On a local scale, looking at the UK, you've really got I'd say 3 or 4 major games hubs in the UK. London has one of the biggest games development sense in the world when you look at the number of game developers here across both kind of PC, console, AAA, mobile. The platform holders are here. We've got Microsoft and Sony, Google all sat in the city with us. But also Guildford has a huge games hub and is only 30 minutes away on train. Leamington Spa, where me and Ben used to work together, is about an hour and a half on the train. And then you've got Cambridge as well, with a good few developers about an hour on the train, with London nestled between those 3 hubs. So in many ways, within a probably hour and a half commute circle around London, you have access to pretty much the majority of game dev talent in the UK. And I think one other thing we thought, we were always going to be open to hiring international talent, and we're hiring people from across the globe right now. And London, I'd say more so than anywhere else in the UK, is quite the attractor for people coming from overseas. It's such a well-known city for people who want to come and live in one of the world's bigger, kind of more exciting metropolitan cities. It's a great place to be. And so we have kind of a lot of success hiring both within the UK, but also hiring people overseas as well. And for us, that was the number one reason for being here in the city. A secondary piece is we're increasingly conscious that the AAA side of the games business, and AAA is something that we make AAA games for PC console here at Sharkmob, but the AAA side of the business and the games as a service side of the business, this idea that you're not making a game to release it and drop it. You release a game and you sustain it for a long period of time. Those two worlds are coming together more and more, and the future, I think it's certain that's going to continue. London does have access to a lot of AAA game developers, but more so, it has a lot of access to, I think, the UK's games as a service experience. So we've got the platform holders here. We have quite a lot of mobile developers like King, Space 8, Natural Motion. And so we wanted to build our studio from day one with the mindset of having both AAA thinkers and games as a service thinkers in the building from a very early conceptual stage. And I can't think of a better place in the world to do that than London. Yeah, a bunch of reasons, but talent being the primary one.
So to kind of build on that conversation, what do video game developers want right now? Like, you've been probably hiring a lot of guys, like I said, in your area and internationally. And how do you see kind of like this internal want of the video game developer change since like when you first started, and what's going on now?
That's an interesting question. Do you want me to go first then, or do you want to jump in?
No, you go for it, because that is an interesting question. It depends. There's a few different angles by which you could approach that, right? There's the sort of the type of lifestyle that people want to lead.
Yeah.
So my children are walking into the office right now, so probably best for James to answer that question first.
So my view is the industry has always been driven by passion. From day one and right now it's driven by passion. So I think you have a huge number of people who are in this industry just because they love games and they want to make games. And I think from way back when the industry started to now, a lot of people choose where they work based on the kind of games those studios are putting out, whether they're passionate about those kind of projects, whether they have a belief in that particular studio to deliver on the ambitions that they're setting themselves. So when we have people come to us, we primarily have people apply who want to make large, ambitious AAA projects that care about storytelling and world building, that care about working on games that are fairly technically innovative and advanced as we try and push the boundaries of what's possible on PC and console. I think where things have changed is where I'd say 20 years ago, that was almost the exclusive driver for pulling people to companies. It is becoming a bit more balanced now. Yes, you want to work at a company where you're super passionate about the projects, but you also want to work at a company that's going to look after you as a person, that's going to surround you with a nice environment, with a group of people that you really, really want to work with, that thinks carefully about your mental health and your work-life balance and your life outside of the office as well as in the office. And that understanding that, sure, our people are passionate about making video games, but they have, as Ben just proved, children at home to look after, and just the desire to do lots of other things around what you do day to day. So these days, I think when you're starting a game studio and you're looking to hire the best talent, you 100% do need to think about how you make a game that's going to inspire people, both for your new talent and the people you're eventually going to sell to. But I think these days you really need to think long and hard about your employee value proposition. What's going to make people want to be at your studio and surrounded by your people, more so than potentially other places that they might work?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that really is that I think, as well as the thing that I've noticed more and more as we've spoken to people and sort of brought them on board at Sharkmob is how people resonate with a passion behind the project for the people sort of setting the studio up. So in that case, myself and James and a few others, there is definitely a potential sort of direction to go in where you're chasing the next big fad, or you're sort of emulating something else that you've seen a success in. And I think people like developers, I think are kind of a little bit they're super sensitive to that sometimes and a bit wary of it. And I think sometimes a developer coming along who's actively pushing for something that they're super passionate about themselves, I think is almost as much of an attraction for those people as being passionate in the game from their side. Like quite often there's not always a clear correlation between the games that people play and are really passionate about from a consumer level and necessarily what they want to work on. And sometimes I think that's almost like the bigger attractor, is the idea that you're going and working on something at a place where there's a high level of ambition and everybody's really excited about what it is they're producing. Because it's infectious, right? It ends up sort of, you get sort of brought along on that journey as well, I think.
I have a question on top of this. So when you're having those interviews with these passionate guys, do you feel like you have to sell your project to them just as they have to sell themselves to you? Do you feel like there's this need to, explain that this is a great game and that people are going to love it and so on?
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's a two-way street. I think, it's as much about the studio or your potential employer doing all the things that James was talking about in terms of looking after you and doing all of that great stuff, and also having something that's exciting to work on and that the developers are really passionate about. And we're in a world now where I think the industry is growing so quickly at the moment with so much energy behind it that people have choices. If they've got a good track record and they've worked on some good stuff, they're a highly valued person in the industry, and they've got plenty of choices and decisions. They could go to different countries, they could go work on different types of games. I think there's always going to be an element of them interviewing us as much as the other way around.
Yeah, it's very true. It's as Ben said, for most senior talent right now, they're not if they're looking for a job, they're not just talking to you, they're talking to a bunch of people, because we're definitely in a place in the industry right now where a lot of companies are expanding. There's a lot of demand for games content, and there's relatively few of the right people around, particularly for specialist roles. And a lot of companies will have fairly similar benefits propositions and things like that, because we all benchmark against each other, and we might try and outdo each other a bit, but there's kind of some standards there. And so as part of our interview process, we quite early on in the process will put somebody under NDA just so we can make sure that the sensitivities around our projects are secure, and we'll then pitch to them. And as Ben mentioned, that's a bit of a two-way street. We want to make sure that, well, for one, if the person is super excited in what we're doing, they're more likely to come and join us. But also, we love the idea that people coming to work on our projects are super passionate about what they're coming to work on. Because I think you always get the best creative work out of somebody who is passionate about what they're doing. And I think it leads to a good vibe and a good atmosphere in the office when you can feel that sense of passion. And I do think here at Sharkmob London, while we can't share much about what we're working on right now because it's such an early stage of development, I think one of the biggest attractors for people when we've been taking them through the interview process that's allowed us to grow relatively quickly, given that we're only 18 months old, is that the project that we're working on and that we're talking to people about as they go through the process is super inspiring to people. And it's been feedback we've had from a lot of the people who've come and joined us is one of the primary reasons they joined us, if not the primary reason, is the project that we're looking to build here at the studio.
So I have a question. It's a bit of a sensitive topic, so if you don't want to answer, then don't answer. So the question is this. So how does compensation work in video game companies? Like, I work and live in Los Angeles, right? And I know a lot of people from different studios, and I know that at the beginning of their careers, if they're in Santa Monica somewhere, they usually live with a roommate, and sorry, they bike to work. It's not that they're living a very lavish lifestyle, right? I also know people who work at like companies like Apple or like Naughty Dog when they are higher, kind of like in this career ladder, and they're doing fine, I guess you can say that. So how does it work in in London? Because I know, as you said, London is kind of expensive, and rent is kind of expensive. So how does this comp work, and is it even important for developers?
So my experience is different games companies have different ways of working out what they want to pay people. At Sharkmob, we wanted to make sure that our benefits system and how much we pay people was well thought about, was based on data, and was fair across the studio. So if somebody said, "Why do I get paid X, Y, Z?" or "Why does this other person get paid this?" we could have a transparent conversation with them because it was based on something meaningful. So in the very early days, when we were only maybe 1 or 2 months old, we set out to build a kind of a grading structure for the company, from a new graduate joining us as a junior right through to a senior director. And we I know this is true in the UK. I'm not sure what global this is, but there's a few salary benchmarking surveys that look at both the games industry, the wider tech industry, the wider creative industry. And we purchase data from 2 of those companies to get a really good understanding of what is the kind of minimum that people are paying, what's the maximum, what's the average, and that kind of thing. And at Sharkmob, as a new company, we wanted to be incredibly competitive in our offering, particularly here in London, and particularly because we wanted to grow quite quickly. So we built salary bands built around the data that we were seeing that felt like it had a competitive edge in the market. And we did the same with our wider benefits package. The way those bands look is they tend to have a midpoint that is data driven, and then a kind of bottom end and a max end that's just kind of extrapolated out from that midpoint. And when we hire somebody, we first assign them a band. We then determine their kind of competency within that band, and that relates to what they get paid based on data, or what they get offered based on data. And that's what we use internally for both hires and pay reviews as we grow. We love this idea that it's data driven, it's based on the market, that it's fair for everybody, and it's explainable because we have a system behind it. Whether that's true for the rest of the games industry, I don't know. I do know of a few other companies that do the same, but I can't speak for most. It has worked very, very well for us. It's just something that we know we need to keep on top of. Every year we need to go and take another look at the data to make sure that we are remaining in the place we want to be.
What about linking kind of the comps and all the other benefits to performance? Like, do you have any systems in place that kind of link those together?
We do, yeah. So we have a profit share scheme here at Sharkmob. So every member of staff shares in the success of the projects we make. I say it's profit based. So once we release a project, initially we'd look to recoup our costs or pay off anything we have to pay off. But at the point where the project starts generating profit, that is shared among every person that has put time into that project. Because we're so early on, we haven't got to a stage yet where we can see quite how that works. We've seen it work very well at other companies that do this. I wouldn't say it's a common thing within the industry, as far as I've seen it, but where it has happened, it's proven to work quite successfully in some places. And those kind of benefit schemes can either not pay out if you're not successful, or can really heavily pay out if you happen to create the next Fortnite, which I'm sure we hope we all will. And that's something we did want to certainly have as part of our benefits package. We wanted to make sure that your salary that you receive month on month was competitive and allowed you to live a good life here in London. But there was that potential to push beyond that if the projects that we work on are successful. And that sense that everybody who works on something gets to share in that, in kind of the outcome.
I was actually a big advocate of profit sharing myself. I was pushing this on all the GDC talks that I did
the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing way to set things up. It means that everybody shares in the success, right? That they've all collectively worked on. I've been in places where they've done it in the past, and it's always been. It's amazing when you do really well, right? Because it's just great news for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's great news for everybody, and I feel like it's a more transparent way of complimenting your staff, rather than you need to get a certain score on Metacritic. Like if it's like over 89 or is like below 95, and which is kind of super subjective anyway, and it doesn't say much, right?
That's very true.
On the user reviews as well. just to make it extra tough.
So let's talk a little bit about the people that you're hiring. You said that the kind of London and the areas around it, they have a lot of very good talent. How did this happen? Like, how did it develop? How did England and kind of UK became this big hub for game development?
That's a really good question. And actually, I probably don't know the history as well as I should for specifically the London area, but I know the UK has been making games since the beginning of the games industry, and we've got a lot of these kind of very old institutions that have been in the games industry since very early on in the beginning. I know Codemasters comes to mind as a studio that's been running in the UK now since, I don't know, the 80s, I'm guessing. I'd have to go on Wikipedia and look it up. But there was a few of those studios, and I think if you look at the major games hubs around the UK, there tends to have been one or two of those big studios, and they tended to have been founded in people's bedrooms, and they just grew into the giants that they now are. And then over the years, we've just seen a lot of breakaways from those studios. So if you go to Leamington, you had Codemasters, you had the guys that started Blitz that worked on the Dizzy games way back when. And I think off the back of that, I know, well, Playground Games was started by a bunch of ex-Codemasters people. I'm guessing, I don't know, Freestyle, I guess, was the same. But you see a lot of these kind of studios over the decades have just spun out of the first big company that was down there. I think in Guildford, I know you had Bullfrog back in the day. And a ton of companies have spun out of that over the years. The London scene, I'm not quite familiar with the history. I know kind of Sony has had a place here for a good long time. There's been a bunch of other studios that have been around for a long time. But what we've seen in London over recent years is a very large influx of international companies moving into London. I say we've got quite large offices in London for Natural Motion, who are part of Zynga, of Space Ape, who are now part of the Supercell family, King, say Sony and Microsoft are here. We've got Sega outfit just on the outskirts of the city, and there's probably a bunch of others that aren't coming to mind right now. So I think London has had companies been around for a while, but we've also seen a huge amount of international growth in London over the last 20 years.
So when you think about games built in Britain and video game developers who work there, there's something peculiar about them. Like if you look at the Japanese games, they have their own kind of vibe. Like the pauses are probably too long in the cutscenes, right? If you look at the American games, they're like you can see people who are doing them. Especially like if you look at big Call of Duty and that kind of stuff. So when I look at stuff like that you mentioned, like at the games that Bullfrog was making, at the Fable series, at the Horizon series, like all those, a lot of games came from UK, right? What do you feel is like this peculiar thing that kind of unites all of them?
That is a really good question, and one I've been debating with both myself and other people over the past few months, because I actually think the UK games industry doesn't brand itself as well as it used to anymore on the international stage. I've often thought now, if you think of like where's the home of really serious AAA game development, you probably go to the west coast of the US with your Naughty Dogs and your Sony Santa Monica's and things like that. Maybe a bit in the Nordics as well. So Sharkmob was originally a spin-off of Ubisoft Massive, as a bunch of the Ubisoft Massive leadership team broke away to start Sharkmob. I think the UK used to be a AAA. Oh, we were perceived as a AAA powerhouse. There's been I think, was it about 10 years ago, there's quite a drain of talent from the UK across to the United States and Canada as the industries in North America started to expand, and there were a kind of bunch of jobs over there. And I've heard a lot of people from outside of the UK talk about the UK being the racing game country now, because we had BlackRock, Bazaar, Playground Games, Codemasters. Like, more than anywhere in the world, I think we make a lot of racing games. And that's definitely true. But as you say, there's been a ton of these other games sprinkled throughout our history. The Bullfrog games, the Lionhead games. I'm conscious that Ninja Theory are
Rare as well, right?
Yeah.
Such a massive, I mean, just that period sort of, during the N64's sort of heyday, everything they made was a smash hit, and it was all so varied as well. But that's the thing that I like sticks out to me when it comes to the UK gaming scene. It's just, I mean, you're right. There's definitely like a bit of a pull towards certain genres like racing, but actually just there's a real breadth, and also it never really sort of, apart from racing, really, it never really manifested in particular sort of clear-cut genres like you might get in other territories. Like, especially if I think about Rare and Bullfrog and the sorts of games they made, they were sort of, they were kind of all by themselves in a lot of ways. It's not like they were trying to emulate anything in particular. It's just they had this. I mean, that's one of the things that I loved about Rare, actually, as a studio back then, the fact that they used to produce so much great stuff, but everything that came out of that place felt like it had its own sort of unique identity. There was a touch of Rare sort of magic, or a certain way they approached visuals, which used to permeate through, from title to title. But generally speaking, you look at something like Jet Force Gemini and compare it to GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie, and they're just all over the place. And it was great.
Yeah, there's a bit of I don't know, British culture and British humour in a lot of those games.
Yeah, like that as well.
I've spoken to quite a few people who feel like over the years the UK has lost. I think in the earlier days there was a lot of character, narrative, adventure style games. Fable being a great example. Mm-hmm. And I've heard a few people say that's kind of, that perception around the world has dissipated a little bit, and the West Coast of America has kind of started taking over that crown. And I believed that myself for a little bit, until I start to remember that we've got Rockstar North in the UK making the Grand Theft Auto series. You have Ninja Theory in Cambridge, who've been working on kind of Hellblade and various other games. The Fable series is still being brought to life by Playground Games at the moment. Down in Guildford, you've got Supermassive working on their very cinematic, character-based games. So I think, to Ben's point, I think we've ended up in a place in the UK where, rather than being known for a specific genre of game, we just make a lot of different types of games. And in some ways, we just need to rework how we brand ourselves on the international stage, because we do AAA, we do mobile, we do games as service. We kind of touch every genre. I am starting to see, I think, a bit of just talking around the various studios, a bit of an increase or a bit of a return to character, story-driven gaming here in the UK. And there's a bit of hope that we can lure some of our expat Brits that have gone over to the States and Canada back again to rebuild the UK games industry to its former glory. And I hope, well, it's part of our mission at the moment to do just that.
I like that you mentioned all of that, because when I was still kind of reading those magazines about, with video game reviews, people were, I had a feeling they had some kind of like a different attitude toward games made in UK. Like whenever like the Bitmap brothers published anything, they were like, oh, that's different. That's and Bullfrog and all the other guys. It felt like I remember there were like pages and pages and pages on those games, because they were just so out of the blue, like, whatever Peter Molyneux was doing. And you mentioned Rockstar, which is also like a huge, incredibly big franchise.
Yeah, I have started to wonder a little bit lately about whether the way your development community in a country is perceived is based on the characters of the games that you make. So if I think of the West Coast of America, even if I just look at LA, you've got Kratos coming out of Zone Santa Monica, you have Nathan Drake coming out of the Uncharted series, and so it starts to paint a picture, because you can put these hero faces in a location. And actually, if I look at the UK game scene for the last kind of 5-10 years, some great AAA games have come out of the country, but I struggle to think of Lara Croft came out of the UK a long time ago, but I struggle to think of like who are the hero game faces of the UK games industry these days. I think that's part of the perception challenge we have. Like I still think of Mario and Sonic when I think of Japan.
Yeah, and I think that maybe that comes down to the other thing that we were talking about, right? It feels like you don't very often in the UK get that thing where there'll be a particular game that comes out that then sort of gets multiple iterations of it, where you sort of get a character sort of developed over time. It just it tends to be more like people put all of their effort into telling this fresh, cool story, and that's almost where I think that's where a lot of the values gained. Is this idea that you're creating something new and fresh, and that it's something for people to get their teeth into and then experience something new, and then it's sort of like moving on to the next thing, the next cool, fresh idea.
Well, I have a couple of questions, not really connected with that, but I think we can move to like the next chapter. Is what skills are currently relevant for you when you're hiring? Like, as an example, a lot of people right now are big on procedural generation. They want to have people who know Python, and then they can generate whatever worlds, buildings, and so on. What are you guys looking for? Because this is an advice for people who are trying to get a job in the industry and they want to know what to learn.
Yeah. That's a great question. This is something that I've spoken at a bunch of different places about at universities and things. I think there's almost like two aspects in terms of the artwork. Anyway, the way I would think about answering your question. The first is, what are we looking for? I think for us specifically, because we are a AAA studio and we're really looking to push quality across the board in a bunch of areas. I think the art production naturally sort of drifts towards this place where you're looking for specialists in particular areas, so people who really understand a particular part of game art production to a level where they've obsessed over it for a bunch of time, or they're willing to become super obsessed around a particular thing and become great at producing this particular type of content, this particular type of work. And then alongside that, because you're putting so much effort into making sure that everything is great, there's always this sort of issue of how you produce that stuff at scale at AAA, which is where I think naturally you start finding people sort of wanting to make the most of those procedural tool sets, like using Houdini to do some really great stuff so that you can keep your quality bar where you want it, but you can do it at a pace where you're not going to take 30 years to produce the thing that you want to put out. And I think that's that ultimately becomes another area where we are super focused. So I think you want those craftspeople. You want those people who are on an artistic level they're super passionate about sculpting the human form or replicating something about environments at a certain level of fidelity. But then you need to find that other skill set, which is this ability to really get in the weeds with some of these great new tools that allow you to do great things at scale. But quite often, and not always, but quite often those tend to be skill sets that exist in sort of separate places. You'll find people that are really great at the sort of more craftsmanship, artistic side of things, and people who naturally gravitate towards the more technical side of things. And if you're super lucky, you'll find people who can do a bit of both and bridge that gap. I think that tends to end up being that elusive person we call a technical artist. They're super hard people to find.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. We, there's, I'd say, across every single games company and over the entire history of game development, there's a lot of the same roles that we've always needed. We always need programmers, specifically C++ programmers, but depending on your studio, kind of good programmers needs across multiple different languages, good environment artists, good level designers, good game designers. So those people are always in very high demand. There is currently, I'd say, a big skill shortage in the industry around certain specialist roles, rendering engineers, Ben mentioned technical artists, UI artists, those very kind of specialist art and engineering and also design roles. Another example on the design side is we've been looking for a combat designer for the studio, and finding people who who have experience doing a particular flavor of combat can be again quite a niche or challenging role to fill. That said, I don't know if you agree with this, Ben, but I always believe it's more important to find somebody who has strong fundamental skills rather than specific toolset knowledge, because a talented developer in a certain field will be able to teach themselves a good tool. And so I would always rather take a, say, incredibly skilled environment artist who has a passion to learn Houdini over an artist who has maybe weaker fundamental skills but has a couple of years of working with Houdini.
I think I generally agree with that. Still, I think, and it's something that I always push when I go to the universities. You see students getting really obsessive over the newest way to use a particular plugin in Max or Photoshop, and actually the thing that would really push their work to the next level is if they attended a life study class every couple of days, and sort of learned the craft on the underneath. I think with some of the more technically focused areas these days, especially with the introduction of things like Houdini, I do think that it's almost becoming its own sort of subset of creative thinking. Like it's that sort of way of being able to construct those systems is almost as much of a skill as being able to, do an amazing job in that life study class that I was just mentioning a second ago.
Aside from the technical skills as well, I'd say, particularly for our field of development, the kind of AAA space, the teams are getting larger and larger and larger. Our internal team is probably going to end up somewhere around 250 people. We'll be working with a bunch of external co-dev partners around the world. So being somebody who engages well with a big, wide team and interacts well with the team is absolutely critical these days, particularly for our kind of flavor of game development. And we strongly believe that the very best creative output comes from teams who feel comfortable and trust each other enough to enter into healthy creative debate. So if you and me have a disagreement about what the right creative outcome is, we feel comfortable having that conversation and trying to drive the best answer and the best conclusion. And so I think people who are good at taking feedback, providing feedback themselves, and having kind of that two-way feedback conversation is super important, regardless of the discipline you work in right now.
James, it's about the soft skills, but you kind of answered that you need to communicate, you need to figure out what other people think, you need to find ways to give feedback that people actually understand what you mean and not get offended. And kind of coming from there, probably the last question for you guys. So James and Benjamin, you're both managers, and I can't find a more challenging workplace to manage rather than a video game development space, because there's these two categories of people. Like there are these artists, let's say, right? And then there is analytical people who are like programmers, and they have completely different mindsets. They live their lives very differently. I know that it's kind of like an oversimplification. Obviously, it's not like 100% true, but you can see the differences. So my question is, like, in this environment, how do you actually get any work done and make sure that they are they don't kill each other?
So not just with kind of the artists, designers, and engineers. Something that we actively pursue is try to find a team with a pretty diverse mindset and kind of ways of thinking, with the philosophy that if everybody does get on, you get the best, again, creative solution, because you get all the ideas on the table, you'll stress test them through debate, and then the best answer comes out of it. So you'll always have the best creative solution if you have the broadest set of creative thinkers in the room. But as you say, that can be a big challenge because those people are prone to fighting. And I think there's a couple of things we certainly do, and philosophically that you can do to try and help these various diverse thinkers work collaboratively together. I think a big one for me is that even if you think differently and you approach problems differently, you're working towards a singular goal that you are aligned on. Part of that is, I think, having a team who are passionate about the project and are passionate about video games in general. I've had a debate for years with people about whether you can be a good games developer if you don't like games or you don't play games. I'm of the camp that thinks the best game developers are people who play games and love games. It's like, how do you be a movie director if you've never watched a film? I actually struggle to understand the idea of a good game developer who doesn't care about the product they're making. So we as a team tend to focus on hiring people who love the field they're working in and love the projects that they're working on. So whether you're an engineer, an artist, designer, or however you think, we're looking to have that singular focus. We intentionally built our studio with the leadership team, the director group, particularly the creative director group, in upfront, because we wanted to make sure that we always had a clear vision that we could articulate to the team and work with the team on. So again, people knew what we were pointing towards and gunning for. And so there's that singular set of goals that people were working towards. And then a really big thing for me is regardless of how people think and approach problems, hiring people who are open-minded, who are good communicators, who are humble. We don't particularly want anybody in the studio who is arrogant or self-interested, and focusing attention on really building high degrees of trust within a team. So even if kind of we collectively disagree about how to approach a problem, we feel comfortable putting our thoughts on the table and debating it. And we hope that in most cases, teams will be able to come to the right conclusion themselves. But one of the reasons that we have a kind of very experienced leadership team at the studio is to also help mediate those conversations should they become kind of not self-conclusive within the existing group. So far, we're saying in 18 months, we're now coming close to 60 people on the team. It's been working quite smoothly, I think. We haven't had nobody's killed each other yet.
Nobody's been killed.
Yeah, no death on the studio. But we have a bunch of tools that we use for that. I mean, just 2-3 months ago, Ben, we stress test some of these exercises on ourselves, and we did things. We went through an exercise called the Management Drives Profile as a group of leads, which is intended to show as an individual what drives me as a human being, and what frustrates me or what irritates me in other human beings. And so we all went through this exercise, compared them, and you could suddenly see where we had conflicting points or challenges as a leadership team. Why in these profiles? It allowed us to have an honest conversation about some of these challenges we'd had in the past and bring them to the surface. And by going through those kind of exercises, we're learning to be more kind of open and transparent with each other as human beings. We're learning to, I think, be more vulnerable with each other. We're getting good at saying, for example, I'm not very good at this, I need some help, or I've done a terrible job on this, come give me a hand with this. Or
even just slightly better at understanding how some of the stuff we do might wind somebody else up.
Yeah,
that was almost like the biggest insight. It was like, oh, okay, this is why this always upsets you, it's because of this thing. So I won't do that again.
We put a huge amount of thought right now into how do you develop teams to kind of trust each other and really enjoy working with each other, despite the fact they will come at problems in very, very different ways. And as I say, we're stress testing these things ourselves, and then we'll roll them out with the team. But it's a philosophy that we want to grow the team around.
Yeah, I would just add to that as well by saying, like, to your question, about all those different groups. I think so it is a bit of a generalization, which is probably a bit unfair, but it is also kind of true. Like on average, you definitely get you sort of more soft, like what's the word I'm looking for? Like more sensitive sort of artists, and you're slightly more like driven, slightly egomaniac sort of design teams, and you're more introverted engineering teams. But I think it's one of the things that makes working in games so much fun. Like from my point of view, anyway, I think as a a director or a leader or a manager, so much of your time ends up being not necessarily stopping people from killing each other, but trying to make those different worlds work with each other in a way that is productive. And it's fun. Do you know what I mean? Like so much of my time in this industry has been sort of literally sort of running around talking to people at different, at their desks and seeing how the work's coming on and working out the right ways in which you can key that person into something somebody else is doing and turn it into something great. It's the best bit of the job, in my opinion.
Yeah. We're actually also very, very lucky that if we get to the stage where we can't answer a question, we come into a severe deadlock. Sharkmob has its own in-house user research facility, and we're building the same in our new London studio that we move into in a few weeks' time. So we can always validate questions with the people we're making the games for. And at the end of the day, I think the right answer is whatever makes our customers enjoy the games the most and want to play them and want to engage with them. So throughout our entire development process, we're going to be making sure that we're validating the decisions we make with our target audience. And that will be a very good way, I think, of answering any deadlock debates when it happens. Answer it with actual playtesting and data.
Awesome. James and Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us today. We're out of time, unfortunately. I would love to continue this conversation for another hour, but probably you have other stuff to do as well. So thank you so much. We'll make sure to post whatever positions you have open and link to the website so people can check out.
Yeah.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.